How's this new segment going to work? Let's start there.
Well, we developed it off the back of quite a lot of interest from our listed companies, where they've got BE scheme shares which have now become available for trading. And they are so keen to make sure that they can still retain their BE status per se. So they want to be able to trade it with BE compliant people, but they want it in a nice regulated, transparent market. So many of these things have traded OTC, but it doesn't give you the same as a regulated environment. And it's really for that. It's to bring the protection of a regulated market to share investors who may also want to partake in companies' BE schemes.
Practically, how's it going to work? Will a company then have X amount of its shares traded normally and a portion set aside in this separate segment?
Well, it is a different class of shares. So in particularly, the first company that's coming through to list with us in February next year is Sasol. So it'll be their Nzalo scheme shares, which will trade separately on the BE segment under the main board of the JSE, subject to all the listings requirements and some additional ones that we've put in place, particularly to highlight to people that these shares are different.
And for companies already listed on the JSE that have an empowerment component, will they be shifting their shares into this new segment?
They don't necessarily have to. We have had some companies who've asked us about, does it make sense for them? And I think it's really about depending on what they're trying to achieve. So some of the companies we've been chatting to are really wanting to achieve a better trading environment for the scheme shares. You know, if they are still locked in for a number of years, there's no point in putting them on a publicly listed market.
And of course, it is when those shares vest or when options vest that they seem to have a problem. So you might have a company that sold a 20% stake to empowerment partners. When the options vest, then they suddenly find out that they don't have 20% black shareholding anymore. Is that the problem there?
Well, it is one of the problems, and we're talking to another particular company where they may want to use our mechanism to transfer the ownership from the one empowerment party they have to actually a broader based set of empowerment partners through this mechanism. So it actually has many purposes, and it really is about what the company wants to achieve.
Is there any concern about perhaps the liquidity or the tradability of the shares under this new segment?
If you look at what would happen if they didn't list them, it would be even worse. So there you would have to, as a seller of your share scheme, you would have to go and find somebody who is BE compliant to sell to. There's lots of very onerous restrictions on the people who are in these schemes. So at least here, what we have is found a public marketplace where you can get more buyers to come together. So there won't be the same sort of liquidity as there is in the ordinary shares, but it'll be much, much better than if it traded OTC.
How about pricing? Would the pricing be the same?
It's unlikely to be the same because the market forces are different. You know, supply and demand will be different. There's only BE compliant people that can trade these shares. So it's unlikely they'll be exactly the same. But markets are very good at adapting and taking care of any price arbitrage gaps. And they will see what looks like a fair price for those particular shares.
Yeah, because I should imagine because of the lower liquidity, it might be slightly cheaper for those shares. So how do you ensure that it's not, that they are being sold to black investors and there's no fronting involved there?
So one of the things we're doing, and this is where the regulation comes in from the JSE, is we're putting some rules in place which actually our brokers, before they can trade for clients, they must check that they're being compliant, and there's a procedure that they have to go through. We will then make sure that they don't trade for accounts that aren't marked or flagged as BE compliant, and as we say, the process. The other thing is the investors who want to buy these shares must sign the generic BE contract, which also has additional terms and conditions. And one of those is, well, do you know you have to be black to buy these shares? So you can't just forge it or say that you are, etc. And if you are found to have had these shares where you shouldn't be, then the company has rights against you in terms of their scheme rules. It's very important that each company has different scheme rules. So there's a generic contract that will help the companies enforce their scheme rules.
Is this something you've also discussed perhaps with the DTI, because it has empowerment codes which stipulates that companies should have a black shareholding? Is this something you've discussed with them perhaps?
We have, in fact. We've gone to see them several times. They are very supportive of what we're trying to do because we're also trying to bring solutions to the market that help the companies. The other thing is that they're also trying to help us get generic type certifications in place so that it's easier for our stockbrokers to verify organizations, companies that are BE compliant.
Of course, you put out a request for comment on this last week. What sort of feedback have you had so far, and when can we actually see this new parallel market being introduced?
So far, the comments have been positive once people understand what we're trying to do, because obviously this is a new offering. where people say, well, why do you want to create a market for a separate segment of people? You know, from a South African context, we want to be part of the solution for broad-based black economic empowerment. And on the other side, what we want to also make sure that we do is provide a fair and transparent market which has generic traits, that it's not too complicated for people to use. We're expecting to launch with SASL. They in fact had their AGM last week where the resolutions were approved to be able to list, and we're hoping that's going to come in the very part of early February.
So really this will lock black empowerment stakes into companies going into the future, won't it?
It will certainly assist them in being able to retain their BE compliance status.
Leanne, just going into 2011, any other moves afoot for the JSE perhaps? How's the Africa board as well doing as we go into 2011?
Well, I mean, we have 2 companies on the Africa board now, and part of the strategy from the Africa board team is to engage with other companies. It is a very slow process. People have to get sort of beyond the fear of the JSE stealing liquidity in the companies. Our own experience from South African companies, those that have dual listed internationally, liquidity has rised enormously in the local market. And we're trying to show them the benefits of that from that perspective. So once you start engaging with people, you actually find quite a positive response. But as we say, you know, this is not a one-day game. This is a long-term strategy that's for long-term growth.